The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual speakers and do not represent the opinions or stance of any of the companies and organizations associated or affiliated with the speakers or this podcast.
On today's episode, I'll be talking with Lucas Black about how, from a security perspective, ChatGPT and other large language models are being adopted in the enterprise. We will delve into the benefits for security operations centers, the risks of data leakage, intellectual property theft, and other challenges that security professionals will need to navigate in what is becoming the new normal. This is the Canadian Cybersecurity Podcast. I'm your host, Damon Baer. So we're back here on the Canadian Cybersecurity Podcast. I am lucky enough to have my co-host over here, Lucas Black, who you may have heard on a previous episode. Today, we're going to delve into ChatGPT and LLMs and how that relates to cybersecurity. There's so much that's going on right now and so many changes that are going on in the industry that it kind of just makes my head spin. Lucas, I guess think right off the top of my head here, what is your experience with, start with ChatGPT. What have you seen in terms of adoption of ChatGPT in industries, and what kind of security concerns are you seeing because of that?
So, as of right now, I've not seen anybody adopt it. I've seen a lot of people talking about it. It comes up in a lot of my conversations now. But a lot of those conversations revolve around companies not wanting to happen to what happened to Samsung, right? So I know a lot of companies are looking at blocking at the firewall level, just don't even allow access out. And I know that some of the firewalls are actually picking it up as an application to watch for and monitor and or just flat out block and deny. So I think that's kind of where I've seen most of the conversations. A lot of people are obviously trying to think of what they can or should use it for, and really it's kind of can probably have two follow-up conversations on this, for the good and evil type of conversations. Because I think that whole AI discovery, the using it in a SOC to simplify things, filter out that noise, but also, kind of during an incident, using it as a tool to help the communication flow. So I think there's lots of things that are going to happen, but I haven't seen anybody kind of go down that path just yet.
Yeah, from what I've seen is from the defense perspective, a while ago when ChatGPT first started becoming more and more prevalent, Microsoft, with their relationship with the OpenAI, was able to leverage it a lot more quickly than other organizations. They came out with the Microsoft Security Copilot, which gives them some capabilities in that defend scenario where they're able to take some various prompts and then inject that into the interface, do searches on the meaning of different alerts and so on. So it kind of simplifies the tasks that a SOC analyst has to do. Now, since Microsoft came out with that a while ago, I've seen other organizations start doing that too, most notably of which CrowdStrike, I think it was yesterday or the day before, they came out with their Charlotte AI analyst. So I thought that was interesting. And I think we're going to see more of that from a defender side.
Yeah, absolutely. And trying to hire a security resource nowadays is pretty hard to do. So I think that those people with a good IT knowledge, but not a security knowledge, that's where, you're going to be able to put that person into a SOC analyst type of role where maybe they were on the help desk, maybe they're, a junior sysadmin, and they'll be able to, be a fully functional SOC analyst in a really short amount of time compared to what it is today. Instead of that 6 months to 18 months to kind of be a comfortable SOC analyst, if they know how to ask the right questions, they can be effective, almost right away.
Yeah, the counter side to that, though, is something that I've read in the news recently in regards to what's deemed as AI hallucinations, where they
Yes.
completely fabricate things. And there was an interesting article that came up where there was a lawyer who was trying a case and was citing precedent to multiple
Yeah.
cases. I think there was like 6 of them.
And it made it all up.
Yeah, completely made it all up.
Yeah.
And then just to verify that it wasn't made up, he actually asked ChatGPT whether or not it's made up. And of course, it completely lied about that as well.
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah.
there's legal ramifications. He might be
Yeah.
disbarred.
Yeah. Well, in that similar article, it also was able to pass the bar. Like,
yeah,
like
exactly.
once it knows that database of questions, it kind of can figure stuff out. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's the whole, like, they've got guardrails in place to protect against certain things, but it clearly, like, don't make stuff up should be a big guardrail that needs to be put in place. And it's hard because a lot of people are like, oh, it's AI, it knows and it must be right. But I
Yeah,
know that in certain cases people have been able to have it change its mind and stuff. Now that was in
yeah,
the earlier versions, but still more guardrails are obviously needed. To me, before it's business ready. It's one thing if a person fabricates something, it's completely different if a machine that should be right is telling you something and it's just completely fictitious.
yeah. Especially since we're putting more and more trust into these and almost treating them as people. And it
Yeah.
was Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, that said you cannot consider these entities or peoples or anything like that. They are tools and you have to treat them as such. Otherwise, we go into a whole nother realm of problems that would be associated with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading another article and it had something to do with one of the Stanford comp sci courses. And it basically goes into to talk about the importance of basically thanking AI and treating it nicely, or else, when it becomes self-aware, it'll come for you first, right? Like if you always
Yeah.
treat it nicely. So like ridiculous things like that. So, I've used ChatGPT for a couple of different things and,
Yeah.
just on the personal side. And I always make sure I say thank you at the end just to kind of cover all my bases that way.
Yeah. As a practice, it's probably a good thing to do. So I think it eventually will keep records of every interaction that you have
right.
and then respond to you.
Yeah, you just don't want Skynet to come and get you. So
That's right.
Yeah.
One thing that I've started using more and more of with ChatGPT, and I have the the paid for version, so I get access to the GPT-4 model, as well as the plugins and being able to access the web so you can get real time information, which is highly
Yeah.
useful. But the plugins are so incredible because you can access all kinds of different libraries of information that you previously couldn't. So whether it's PDFs or other websites or so on. And I think what some people are starting to do to leverage the capabilities of the plugins are pointing it over to internal repositories of information
Yeah.
and then getting that information, then pulling it into the environment so that they can do manipulation of the content.
Yeah.
So
And I think
on
that's
its
going
face,
to be
that's a novel thing.
Yeah.
So
And
on its face, I think that's a novel thing, but you have to look at what are the risks of leaking internal data that way.
Yeah. Again, that's one of those things that how do you put controls around that? Like a lot of the projects I'm working on currently revolve around data loss prevention with various technologies. How is, Palo Alto, Netscope, Proofpoint, how is the DLP going to handle that? Because once ChatGPT has had a look at that pool, what can it do? What is that now property of OpenAI? Is that leaving the corporate cloud or on premise? I don't know. Like it's something I think probably very few people know. And
I
how
know
do you
with
test that?
OpenAI, you do have the ability to opt out and delete
Okay.
the prompts that you put in there. And I highly recommend any organization that's using that for corporate purposes to follow those procedures. And in this podcast at the end of the reference notes, I'll have a link on how to do that. But I think that what some organizations are doing is they're using alternative models. So not necessarily ChatGPT, but they have an offline version of a large language model, which they use internally.
Mhm.
And then that's the controls that they put in place to make sure that stuff doesn't leak out of the environment.
Yeah. And to me, that makes a lot more sense. Some of I'll use oil and gas as an example because I'm based in Calgary. Like, I know some of the big players have data lakes of multiple petabytes, and especially ones that have kind of an end-to-end operation of the mining, the refining, and then the actual retail services.
Yeah.
They've got so much data that's just begging to be asked questions of.
Mm-hmm.
And like you were mentioning, bringing that internal, that can make a lot of sense. And obviously there's a lot that can be done in every field to find those efficiencies. I know in medical research, the speed that it can process is, I mean, if you had a human sit there and try and do all those things, or it can find those very minute points of reference that a typical human just would probably ignore and see as background noise. So
yeah, on the counter side of that, though, is once you have a localized large language model that has access to all the information within an organization, you now have to start securing that. And there's no designation of roles or access levels or anything like that, but very basic authentication to these sorts of systems. So until that's in place, where you can start setting up different roles, access levels, auditing capabilities, I'd be very hesitant myself to tell an organization that they should do that.
Yeah, and I think this is exactly where I remember, I don't even know how many years ago now, but when cloud first started, people started having that cloud conversation. There were some companies that just picked everything up and chucked it into the cloud. And I'm hoping that those companies don't do that. Like, just because the technology is there doesn't mean you have to use it. Cloud security has come a long way, but it's still way behind the on-premise comparison, right? So I think there's going to have to be the same learning, because I mean, you and I are both security professionals, and we can start to treat it as if it's, data, but it treats that data is interacted with differently. And if we put the controls we probably want to put on, nothing's going to happen. Like, the benefit of the AI isn't there. So I think there's going to be a lot of trial and error and learning, and a lot of mistakes being made over the probably next 6 to 24 months.
Yeah. Like, how do you train an AI model to only look at segments of the data that you have within an environment and not incorporate anything else that it may look at?
Yeah. I mean, if you're opening that pool up, it's going to take the whole pool, right? So how do you segment? What communications does it have inside and out of your organization? All those things are going to be, again, a lot of problems, I think, over the next couple of years. And I think the security news that we hear about breaches and ransomwares are going to be overshadowed by, again, going back to the Samsung thing, like, oh, we lost, or trade secrets were leaked, or something completely ridiculous that somebody was trying to do. And it comes back to, there's a security issue, but it's also a people problem, right? Like, you have to tell people or trade them, or basically make it impossible for them to use these tools until they have the full knowledge of how to use these tools. And I mean, that's great to say on the corporate side, but obviously, people are still clicking on links and emails and all that type of thing. So the weakness will always be the people, and it will probably take AI to protect AI from the people. So
in Japan, what I heard about recently is they created a new law that says anything that you use to train an AI model, whether it's from creative or copyrighted works or so on, is good to go, no problem. And then any works that are created from that, they don't have to pay anything back over to the original one. There's no attribution. So when you think of a company like Samsung, for instance, who put source code into there and have that, they're basically in Japan, they're saying that you're now able to take anything that is provided there and make use of it and call it your own. So that could be along the same lines of stealing source code from different organizations. And that's just Japan, but who knows what different laws are going to come in place across the world as they try to stay competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many benefits and so many issues that I don't think anybody's really fully thought about yet. And they had that, I can't remember how many tech leaders it was, but led by Elon and some of the other people that are like, we need to basically pump the brakes. Let's sit down and think about
pause.
it. Yeah, a 6-month pause. Like, let's just think about things. But in a competitive growth field like this, 6 months, even 6 days could be the difference between, like, it took ChatGPT 5 days to get to 1 million users.
Yeah.
So 6 days can absolutely ruin something, let alone 6 months.
Yeah.
So for the corporate side of things and trying to monetize AI, I don't think anybody's want to put a pause on any of it.
Yeah.
And that we've been talking a lot on the corporate side, but on the other side, every bad person that is involved in cybercrime is basically pushing ahead with AI as fast as possible.
Completely. Yeah. And
so again, those
some of the
6
things
days,
that I've seen from that regards is being able to do code obfuscation, polymorphic malware generated on the fly, all with an LLM model that is within an organization, so it doesn't need to go out. Once the binary is in there through an initial exploit and access, then it can basically do everything itself. It doesn't need to go out for command and control. It has a directive. It is its own command and control.
Right. Yeah. Now and most command and controls are caught through the firewall, right? And now, like you said, it doesn't have to go out and talk. So once it's in, and who knows what's going to happen from there. The one use case that I've come across a number of times is non-English speaking threat actors using it to craft basically perfect spam email.
Yes.
And you could use the number one thing that we've told users for years is look at the contents of, is there clear grammar or spelling mistakes? Well, ChatGPT doesn't have those, right? Like, it is perfectly crafted. And especially if it has access to a pool of, I was reading an article about it crafted a perfect email based on reading through Bill Gates' email. So they crafted a perfect Bill Gates email, same tone, same everything. So again, if it's inside the company and you get access, say, to your CFO, you can have it craft the perfect email. Oh yeah, transfer funds, to this account. And it comes down to, is somebody going to actually call or walk to that person's office and say, did you actually do this? Especially with work from home or work remote, those conversations don't happen anymore.
And I think
nobody stops by your office because you might not even be in the same city or province. So
I think what the next evolution of what that will really be is, the LLM can go through an entire email archive, figure out the tone, but then export that as a persona. And then that persona can be sold over to a third party and associated with somebody's identity. There's also a number of tools that are out there that allow you to clone voices.
And that's where it's going to get real scary, because if you're going to ask a question, like somebody doing that check over a phone, well, that check over phone is no longer valid anymore.
You could call in, you can have the same tone, the demeanor, ask the same questions, and that identity can be sold a number of times all around the world. So people will be chasing down doppelgangers of themselves.
And one of the things I mentioned that I've been working on, those DLP projects, the other one that it keeps coming up is brand protection or brand reputation, or and dark web monitoring? Are we going to have cyber insurance as an individual? Like, or do we just not talk anymore? Like, even having this podcast, it's probably enough to scrape my voice and your voice,
It is.
and create a persona, right? So
Yeah.
terrifying stuff, cool stuff, but terrifying.
Yeah, I've done that for myself actually, so that I've created my own voice model so that when I do editing or creation of content, I can just type it in there, whatever I want, and it'll speak exactly in the same tone of voice, same inflection. This might not even be me right now.
Well, you've done a good job at recreating yourself then.
Well, all you really need is a poor camera, and that makes things a lot easier. Rendering time goes down. Yeah,
for sure.
One other interesting thing that I've heard about from a defense perspective of what can be done with this is having the capability for reverse engineers and malware analysts to do more introspection on code that they get. So some of the things that I've read that they're able to do now is teaching themselves assembly language using that, and writing POC source code very quickly so they can take a possible vulnerability and then create the POC for that, doing translation between different instruction sets, code analysis for malware samples. So it allows them to be more effective in response to the malware that they have come across, so that they can do things and create solutions for that malware more quickly.
Yeah, that's a great use case for it. And I think it'll be interesting to see where some of the sandboxing technologies go, because right now it takes time to send that off, process, and then get the result back, right? Now, depending, again, if you're able to take that and bring it into more on-prem instead of it going out to some cloud resource for processing, users aren't even going to notice that. And right now, I feel like sandboxing is used, but it's used kind of as a worst case scenario. Like, you try not to send something to a sandbox, but if you had that ability to tear something apart really quick and kind of really test it, I think that's going to be kind of the next sandboxing version 2 type of thing.
There's so many different capabilities that are available. I think the first iteration of being able to make use of large language models is what the industry basically calls prompt engineering, crafting the prompts so that the AI does whatever you intend it to do. But the problem with that is that there's so many different possible ways that you can create different sorts of prompts, and the tone, the ability to act as different people and so on. What people have done is they've created these massive Excel spreadsheets that you use in order to craft up these different things. And I follow probably at least 20 or 30 different people that are constantly releasing these different things. But prompt engineering is the first method of being able to use for that. The next thing that I really see, which is going to happen from an enterprise or corporate environment, is what's being referred to as AI ops. Being able to take the capabilities that you have with the large language models and then create workflows around that, and have governance and security and process and review, treating it in the same way that you do with code.
Yeah. Again, that would take a lot of those issues that we were discussing earlier, and wrap it around, have that compliance checkbox saying, we're using it, but it's also not leaking anything anywhere. I can't imagine what clean code would look like at this point in my life as well. So
I think that the code that we'll end up seeing in the future will be much similar to assembly, where it's purpose-built, generated just in time for the objective that's trying to be achieved at that given moment. And it will not be human readable whatsoever.
No, which is, I mean, lots of benefits, lots of drawbacks, but it's going to be interesting to see where that goes, because there's a lot of possibilities for good and evil. So
I think being able to do code reviews, figure out what's bad code, what's good code. If you're not looking at the code, how do you really know? Like with assembly, what good code would be is the efficiency, the ability to have fewer errors, reduction in the number of lines, and increase of power efficiency. But when it comes to other code in general, those aren't necessarily the primary considerations. It's more about functionality, security, reusability, all those sorts of things. So are we going to end up losing a lot of those things through machine-centric generated code? I don't know.
Probably. It would make sense. Right now, I'm not a coder, but with ChatGPT, I can code. I can do very basic things in PowerShell, but I can ask the right questions. And I know I've used it for PowerShell before. And you can do some pretty intricate things pretty quick that I never would have been able to do based on my limited PowerShell experience.
Yeah, what I like doing with it is you take a chunk of code, you import that in, and you say, what is this code actually doing?
Yeah.
And then it'll tell you specifically what each section of the code is actually doing. And then you can say, I would actually like the code to do this instead, or take this chunk of code and then do this. So generate that on the fly. And then it's able to do that.
Yeah. Makes somebody look actually pretty smart.
Yeah. And then from the results from that, you can even get it to review that code and say, okay, this code is great, make it better.
Yeah, optimize it. Yeah. And I think that, going back to your point of reusability, I like that kind of goes out the window because it can just generate it faster than you could probably find or call a function. Like it'll just generate it. But yeah, being able to take that and change the workflow very specifically on the fly, I think it's going to change a lot of IT processes in a big way.
Yeah. So from your perspective, what do you see is going to happen with large language models as it relates to security over the next, let's say, 6 months?
I think kind of the big players are definitely like CrowdStrike, Microsoft. They've really come a long way in what they can do. I think that's just going to keep going further and further. I wouldn't be surprised to see all the major security vendors come out with a tool. Now, what that looks like, it could be, depending on the tool, what it will look like. From a programming standpoint, the thing that pops in my head would be firewall rules, because firewall rules are poor programming in most cases. And if you've got thousands of rules, are you going to sift through all those? Hopefully. But it's always that hidden any rule or allow all somewhere in there. And I think that's going to be, for me and what I do, typical day to day. I would love to see something from one of the major firewall vendors, kind of as a quick check. Dump your config files, load it into this site, and we're going to tell you what's wrong with it. At the same time as working for an organization that does firewall assessments, it's a revenue source that we're not going to be able to count on anymore, right? So I think that would be a great use case for it. But again, I think really the major players in the SIEM space are going to be the ones that can really benefit from how they implement this. Being able to type in a plain English question and get a very technical response, I think, is what's going to happen.
Well, thank you very much for coming back on the podcast. It's been a fabulous discussion. I think what we should probably do is come back to this topic in 6 months, see how things have progressed.
Yeah,
and then
it'll be interesting.
Yeah, see what happens.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Okay. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks.
Okay, Sophia, I think you're ready.
This is the Canadian Cybersecurity podcast. Does anyone have some water? Seriously, I'm gonna choke here. This isn't cool. I need some water. Do this. I don't have to say something lame. Do I, subscribe to my super cool podcast, or this is so amazing. I could fall asleep to it. It's like cybersecurity ASMR. But actually, do subscribe. I get paid more that way. I got bills. Yo. And We'll be dropping some mad knowledge on y'all. Don't miss what's coming next.